Part 1. Introduction. While the 1930s and 40s saw Europe plunged into conflict and global war, bringing rationing, sacrifice, and devastation to millions, a small circle at the very top of Germany's National Socialist regime inhabited a starkly different reality.
This is not a study of the war's battles or its political ideologies. Instead, it is a descriptive account of the material world, the personal estates, the vast collections, and the opulent lifestyles cultivated by the Third Reich's senior leadership. Publicly, the regime promoted ideals of national sacrifice, community, and a certain Spartan toughness. The winter relief campaigns, for instance, urged citizens to eat one-pot meals and donate the savings to the poor. But behind this facade of public austerity, the elite ruling class was securing a life of immense personal luxury.
We will examine the homes they built, the art they acquired, the food they ate, and the personal fortunes they amassed. This is the story of the Gilded Reich, a parallel world of excess that existed alongside a continent at war.
Part 2. From the moment Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, the Nazi elite became a new aristocracy. Party loyalty was rewarded not only with influence, but also with material gain, state-funded homes, cars, and stipends. Hitler himself insisted on a carefully crafted image of simplicity, but his top lieutenants, Göring, Himmler, Goebbels, Bormann, and others, amassed wealth and lived in style. Nazi propaganda portrayed them as tireless servants of the nation, yet behind closed doors they lived in the splendor of palaces, mountain retreats, and art-filled villas. Part 2. The Reichsmarschall's Horde. Hermann Göring. No figure better personifies the sheer scale of this luxury than Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring. As head of the Luftwaffe, creator of the Gestapo, and for a long time Hitler's designated successor, Göring used his immense power to become one of the wealthiest men in Europe. His primary residence was an estate known as Karrenhall, located northeast of Berlin. It began as a modest hunting lodge, but was relentlessly expanded into a palatial compound. It was a personal monument featuring a private cinema, a vast library, and even a gymnasium. Göring reportedly had a personal full-scale model railway setup in the attic. But Karrenhall's main purpose was to house his most consuming passion, his art collection. Göring was, by any measure, one of the most prolific art collectors in history. However, his methods of acquisition were a direct result of his political power.
He employed a team of art experts and agents who operated across occupied Europe. Their primary task was to identify and seize collections, particularly those belonging to Jewish families and institutions. The Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, or ERR, was the official Nazi agency for plundering cultural property, and Göring was its greatest beneficiary. He would have first refusal on confiscated art, selecting thousands of paintings, sculptures, and tapestries for his personal collection.
His personal effects were equally extravagant. He was known for his custom-designed uniforms, which ranged from pure white parade dress to pseudo-Roman togas. He wore rings set with enormous jewels, and carried a field marshal's baton. His lifestyle extended to his transportation. He utilized a luxurious private train, which served as a mobile headquarters and hotel, complete with a private car for his wife and a climate-controlled car for his art. He hosted elaborate hunting parties on his estates, where guests would feast on game and fine wines, even as food rationing for the general public became increasingly severe.
Goering's wealth also came from his consolidation of German industry. As plenipotentiary for the four-year plan, he controlled vast sectors of the economy. He founded the Reichswerke Hermann Goering, a massive industrial conglomerate built on state capital and, later, seized assets from occupied countries like Austria and Czechoslovakia. This state-owned enterprise funneled enormous personal wealth directly to him. This accumulation continued even as the war turned against Germany. In the final years, as the Luftwaffe was being decimated, Goering was reportedly focused on designing new, ever more grandiose uniforms and securing his art collection from Allied bombers. Part 3. The Führer's Court, Hitler's Private World.
Adolf Hitler, in stark contrast to Goering, cultivated a public image of an ascetic. He presented himself as a simple soldier, a vegetarian, a non-smoker, and a teetotaler who was, quote, married to Germany and devoted his entire being to the nation. He was often photographed in a simple party uniform or a trench coat.
This image, however, was a carefully managed piece of propaganda. While his personal tastes may have been less flamboyant than Goering's, his lifestyle was one of immense state-funded comfort and privilege.
The primary example is the Berghof, his mountain home in the Obersalzberg complex in Bavaria. This was not a humble cabin. It was a sprawling, luxurious villa, redesigned and rebuilt at enormous state expense by his administrator, Martin Bormann. It featured a great hall with a famous 26-foot-wide picture window that could be lowered into the ground. It was filled with expensive carpets, 18th-century furniture, and valuable tapestries.
The Berghof was Hitler's private court. Here, he entertained high-ranking officials, foreign dignitaries, and his personal inner circle. Guests were treated to lavish meals. Despite his own vegetarianism, the kitchens were state-of-the-art, and film screenings in his private cinema. The entire complex was a restricted, high-security zone, a mountain fortress of privilege.
Nearby, Bormann also commissioned the Kelstein House, or Eagle's Nest, as a 50th birthday present for Hitler from the Nazi Party. This building, perched atop a mountain peak, was an engineering marvel, accessed by a 400-foot elevator drilled through solid rock. Hitler himself rarely visited, finding it unsettling, but it was used extensively to impress visitors and stands as a potent symbol of the regime's architectural and financial excess.
But where did Hitler's personal wealth come from? Publicly, he forswore his government salary. In reality, he controlled a massive personal fortune. A significant source was his book, Mein Kampf. It became an official state text given to every newly married couple and bought in bulk by municipalities, making him one of Germany's wealthiest authors.
A more direct source of income was his image. Martin Bormann, who controlled Hitler's finances, arranged for a royalty to be paid to Hitler for every postage stamp that bore his likeness. With billions of stamps printed, this generated a vast, untaxed personal income that flowed directly to him. This wealth allowed him to operate outside of any state budget. He used it to buy art for his planned Führer Museum in Linz and to provide generous handouts to his inner circle. So while the German public saw a frugal leader, the private reality was one of curated, state-sponsored luxury, all built on the mechanisms of the state and his own manufactured personality cult. Part 4. Propaganda of austerity versus private excess.
This disconnect between public messaging and private life was a hallmark of the regime. The man most responsible for that messaging was propaganda minister Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels was the architect of the Total War speech in 1943, demanding that Germans give up all comforts for the war effort. He asked, "Do you want total war? If necessary, do you want a war more total and radical than anything that we can even imagine today?" The crowd roared, yes. Goebbels himself, however, lived a life far removed from the sacrifices he demanded. He maintained a palatial official residence in Berlin, where he hosted sophisticated parties for the cultural elite. He also possessed a luxurious lakeside villa on the island of Schwanenwerder, a millionaire's colony in Berlin. This estate was his private refuge. He was known for his expensive, custom-tailored suits, his appreciation for fine French wines, and his access to any luxury goods he desired, all while his own ministry was producing newsreels praising the stoic German housewife making a meal from potato peelings. Other officials followed suit. Martin Bormann, the party chancellery head, controlled the Obersalzberg complex, turning it into his personal fiefdom. He built his own lavish home there and managed the finances that kept the entire Nazi court running. Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, poured enormous sums into Wewelsburg Castle, which he intended to be the ideological and ceremonial home of the SS. Millions of Reichsmarks were spent renovating it into a pseudo-mystical Arthurian castle, a project that used concentration camp labor. Even Albert Speer, the architect of the Reich, who cultivated an image as a rational technocrat, was granted a grand state-owned estate and had access to virtually unlimited resources for his monumental building projects, which were themselves a form of state luxury. This elite enjoyed practical luxuries unavailable to anyone else. They had access to special Sondershops reserved for high officials, which were stocked with goods from all over occupied Europe: Parisian perfumes, Dutch cheeses, Danish butter, and Ukrainian caviar. They traveled in custom-built Mercedes-Benz limousines, often armored, and had priority access to the shrinking supplies of gasoline.
Part 5. The Architecture of Power and Plunder.
The question remains, how was this lifestyle financed? The answer lies in a system that blurred all lines between the state, the party, and the personal property of its leaders. The first source was the state itself. Once in power, the Nazi leadership had access to the entire German treasury, which they used for special projects, a term that often meant personal residences, art acquisitions, or lavish parties disguised as state functions. The second and more direct source was Aryanization. This was the state-sanctioned seizure of property and businesses belonging to Jewish citizens. Beginning in 1933 and accelerating after 1938, Jewish entrepreneurs were forced to sell their companies for a fraction of their value, often to party-favored industrialists. Their homes, apartments, and personal possessions, art, furniture, jewelry, were confiscated. Much of this property was either absorbed by the state or made available at low cost to high-ranking officials.
The third source was systematic plunder from occupied territories. As the Wehrmacht advanced across Europe, it was followed by special units like the ERR, tasked with cultural theft. The homes of wealthy Jewish families in Paris, Amsterdam, and Vienna were emptied. National museums were looted. This property flowed back to Germany, where leaders like Goering had their pick. But it wasn't just art. Occupied nations were forced to pay occupation costs, essentially funding their own plunder. Their factories were seized, their food reserves were shipped to Germany, and their resources were exploited. The Nazi elite had first access to all of it. A fourth source was slave labor. The SS, under Himmler, became a massive economic empire. It ran the concentration and extermination camps, which provided a limitless pool of free labor. This labor was used for state projects, for private industry, and for the personal projects of the elite, such as quarrying stone for stadiums or building private roads and residences. Finally, there was the system of gifts from industry. German corporations, eager to secure government contracts or favor, would provide high-ranking officials with donations, custom-built cars, or financial backing for their pet projects. This created a cycle of corruption where political power was directly exchanged for material wealth.
Part 6. Conclusion. A world apart.
The lifestyle of the Nazi high command operated in a world completely insulated from the one they had created. As the war progressed, this contrast became more and more profound. In the final, desperate months of the war, as German cities were being reduced to rubble and civilians were starving, the leadership remained secure in fortified, well-stocked compounds. Hitler directed the final, futile defense of Berlin from his bunker, a concrete complex that was, in its own way, a final subterranean luxury, provisioned with food, water, and power while the city above ceased to exist. The opulence of the Nazi elite was not a secret indulgence. It was a fundamental expression of their power. They saw themselves as a new aristocracy, entitled to the spoils of the nation and the continent they had conquered. The people's community they preached was, for them, a pyramid, with their own class at the absolute apex, enjoying a life of luxury built on a foundation of plunder, exploitation, and systemic theft. When Allied forces finally entered the residences of Karenhall, the Berghof, and the Berlin Chancellery, they found cellars stocked with priceless wine, walk-in closets full of custom clothes, and warehouses filled with stolen art. The evidence of this lifestyle, gathered and cataloged, remains a crucial and often overlooked part of the historical record.
Thanks for watching.
Please like and subscribe for more content from War Chronicles.